Let's welcome today our guest speaker, Alex Schlager from eIceberg. eIceberg. That's wonderful. From iceberg to eIceberg. Alex, can you introduce yourself about what you do and where are you based?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Kashif. I'm Alex Schlager. I'm the founder of eIceberg, based in New Jersey. eIceberg is an AI security company. We provide real-time protection at runtime. So we don't do design time, we don't do build time, we do runtime. Think of us as a detection and response platform for AI events. In other words, as companies build use cases, or where users and or applications interact with a generative model or an agentic AI workflow, we sit in that path and we enforce the safety and security policies of our clients.
Okay. So you must have started most recently. So before starting eIceberg, what you were doing?
Been in IT all my career. Started many years ago as a developer, we called it programmer back then.
Right.
Went into network security and network architecture, worked for Cisco, Deutsche Telekom, did a lot of work in IT outsourcing around the globe, joined Verizon to run their Central European organization, and then moved to the US to run Verizon's cybersecurity product organization. And after all that large enterprise, corporation work, you're an iceberg now.
Okay. So, okay. Now let's think as with the chat GPT 2 years back, what was the top 1 or 2 points which comes in your mind that we need to do something about generative AI or AI security and putting guardrails? What was the concept behind, and then how you got motivated? Yes, this is the right time to start eIceberg.
So eIceberg actually goes back to a research project we funded 2.5 years ago around AI explainability. So this was
Okay.
probably 3-4 months before GPT, came onto the scene and became very popular. At that time, we were very interested in so-called black boxes, so deep learning model or deep learning based architectures that are non-comprehensive to humans, and trying to build technology that makes them explainable. In other words, how can you almost reverse engineer a deep learning model to provide a degree of explainability that is suitable for human observers? And throughout that research project, GPT was released, and we realized that explainability should be an extremely important part with Gen AI, right? We can't explain Gen AI models. We can't even interpret them effectively. But if we build guardrails and safeguards around these models, they should be human explainable and human comprehensible. So we transferred that research work basically into a productization effort to build guardrails, to build safeguards that are accessible and comprehensive to the human user.
Okay. And now over the last 2 years' work, how do you see from a security standpoint of, is there a requirement? Was there a requirement?
Well, it depends who you ask. If you just look at simple use cases, let's say chatbots, right? The safety aspect, I think, is very important, right? In sense of toxic speech, illegality, and content that should not be part of these exchanges or conversations. You could expand this to, let's say, teenagers using chatbots, with the whole discussion we had in social media. On the security aspect, you could make the argument, hey, if my model is hacked and my model now swears at my customer, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. It changes with agentic AI, right? So if you look at risk and potential fallout of a breach, of an attack, of a chatbot versus an agentic workflow, the stakes are significantly higher. Because now that we take previously human-based or human-driven processes that were often IT supported, and we move them to autonomous agents, it's not only about a chatbot misbehaving. these are fundamental business or IT processes for that matter. And them or these processes being breached or being misused, represents a significantly higher risk than a single chatbot, obviously.
Okay, so now let's understand as part of eIceberg, what actually you provide. Is it a product? Is it a services? And maybe step by step, if it's a product, then what actually it does? What are the benefits to customers, or if they want to adopt to that?
So it's a platform. And what we ultimately do is we orchestrate machine learning models, explainable machine learning models that we curated, tested, and maintain ourselves and against certain inputs. So the platform exposes an API or as many APIs as you want to use, sits on the cloud in AWS actually, and takes inputs and analyzes these inputs. And it routes these inputs to your large language model or to your agentic workflow. It takes the response or the output of an agentic workflow or model and does the same analysis on the path back and basically provides them to you. So think of us like a proxy or a firewall. We sit inside the traffic or in line between a user or an application and a generative model or an agentic AI framework. And as this traffic transits our platform, we apply policy accordingly. So it is a platform that ultimately orchestrates our purpose-built explainable machine learning model against inputs. So think of a proxy or a firewall that doesn't examine frames or packets, it examines natural language. So a user or application interacts with a large language model or an agentic workflow, and we basically sit in between. So we take the input, we examine the input based on the policy you configure in the platform on safety, security, compliance. And if the input is clean, we route it into your large language model or agentic environment, agentic workflow. We get the respective output or response. We do the same on the return path and basically hand it back to you. So like a firewall or proxy, we sit in line of the traffic and perform and execute the policy that you have configured on them. That's the runtime component, if you like. There are a number of tools, red teaming, prompt testing, bias testing, that supplement the real time monitoring of the platform. But the overall principle is to enable our customers to adopt AI in a safe, secure, compliant, and observable manner.
Okay, and is it not creating an overhead between the prompt or the conversation, which is business user starting, and with the backend system or with the Gen AI?
It does. So the question of latency is important for
Mhm.
the end user experience. When we say real time, we mean real time, which is around 200, 250 milliseconds is kind of the threshold that we provide service levels on. But it depends. If you look at agentic workflows, the majority of agentic workflows are not very time sensitive, right? Because we are automating previously human driven processes, which might have taken a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and we're moving them to agentic AI. Now, if you introduce 200, 300 milliseconds there, it is not an issue unless, of course, the agentic workflow itself is real time dependent or real time focused. But again, then 200 milliseconds normally is not an issue for our.
Okay, and based on your work, what are the common patterns are emerging, which you can say, yes, organizations started taking seriously, and they're not looking only on agentic AI to just build in whatever the platform or the LLMs they were going to use it, but they are looking forward such platforms that where they can provide these features.
Mhm. Well, interestingly, in the early days, my assumption was we have learned from the cybersecurity days that when we build new use cases, we build them immediately with security.
Right.
I was wrong, right? We
Yeah.
see a lot of companies pushing very hard on the innovation, on being competitive in the AI space, and they're now starting to implement safety and security measures, even with environments which are already in production. So I think I might have been too optimistic in thinking that this might have been done differently. So the majority of clients we work with either are close to going to production with a use case or already have a use case in production when it comes to the use of Gen AI models, internal chatbot, external chatbot, and so on and so forth. On the agentic side, we see a bit more caution. I think there, to my earlier point, there is a stronger awareness of the elevated risk surface that agentic workflows bring. There we see companies tapping earlier into the security and safety space. So to give an example, clients we work with on agentic AI don't have an agentic AI workflow in production. They have 3, 4, 5, 6 use cases that are relatively mature, but they're now truly understanding how to secure them at design time, build time, and runtime accordingly.
Okay, so you said with the agentic AI, there's a more consciousness is there that okay, how we gonna do it, how we gonna manage it.
Yes, because I give you an example. We recently secured an agentic workflow that is an IT service management automation agentic environment. So it does password reset, new user creation, user data change, and email verification, and a number of other things. So the awareness that if you move this from a previous IT tool or even human-driven process to an agentic process, you give autonomy to the machine, has inherent risks, right? If you hack, if you get into in between those flows, you basically have the keys to the kingdom, right? Because it deals with password resets, with credentialing, and so on and so forth. So you can't automate these IT service management processes without the observability and assurance that they are safe, secure, and actively monitored for breach and misuse attempts.
Okay, and how do you see the adoption both on the Gen AI side in the business, in life scenario, production scenarios, and agentic AI?
On the Gen AI models, we see broad adoption, in particular when it is end customer consumer facing, right? Your service agent, your customer chatbot, enabling your user manuals via rec for people to ask natural language questions. That is a very common use case that found very rapid and broad adoption. But to my earlier point, it has a limited risk surface in sense of things that could go wrong. On the agentic side, we have not seen anything in production yet. We have seen relatively mature flows. But what I think a lot of people underestimate is even a simple agentic environment is relatively complex in sense of the moving parts and what happens between the original user or application input and the final output. I would put it like this. If a human-driven or human IT-supported process is highly repetitive, it is a low-hanging fruit to start moving that into agentic AI. We also see a lot of clients starting to understand that moving to agentic AI is not the replication of the previous legacy process, but the outcome. What I mean with that is if a previous process involved 3 humans and 2 IT tools, you're not trying to replicate that. You look at the outcome it creates and you try to understand how to create the same outcome with an agentic.
Very well explained. That because that's the challenge right now, where we are trying to, if we are trying to adjust the agentic AI with the legacy and older way of doing it, the event-driven, formula-based, rule-based, then it's mean then we're just trying to figure out whatever we have, just bring the agentic AI into that.
Exactly, right? The other question we often ask clients when we talk about agentic AI is, are you augmenting AI with humans or are you augmenting humans with AI? In the latter case, you basically push towards a full autonomous process in the end, where you take out the human out of the loop eventually completely. In the first piece, you want the human to augment the AI because you always want the human in the loop at the end. I'll give you a simple example. You are a law firm and you basically automate your paralegal function. You still will have a lawyer at the end. You augment basically the humans to look at the final contract, right? Nobody will have a contract produced by AI and just blindly start to apply it. Or think of medical, right? Medical examination that is carried out by AI. A patient will want the assurance that a human looked at it and said, this looks, even if the AI is more precise than a human, from a trust perspective, we still want that last step to be a human in the loop. And I think that's important to distinguish as you design your agentic processes, to keep in mind whether it's human augmenting AI or the other way around.
Okay. So now let's think about a scenario where, from a listener's point of view, that if someone want to maybe build an agentic AI and they are new to the agentic AI world, and based on your experience, any recipe or you can give them, share it with them, okay, there are a few challenges and how to overcome them.
So to my earlier point, the low-hanging fruit are highly repetitive processes that basically don't have very complex forking, meaning the conditionality is not too big, right? So it's highly repetitive, and conditionality, is relatively simple. Those are normally low-hanging fruits to start basically mirroring them or moving them to agentic AI. The second question then becomes, what is the best framework? There's a large number of different frameworks. Some are more suitable for specific use cases than other. One big difference is, to give you one example, is the role of the agent and the role of the large language model, right? If you look at Crew AI as a framework, the agent is relatively dumb. It's mostly an orchestrator, and it obviously uses an LLM for instructions and for actions. But there's other frameworks where the agent and the large language model are much closer coupled, or even indistinguishable. If you use deep research with OpenAI, you cannot tell the difference between where the agent starts and the model ends, right? And so I think once you understand the process that you want to port, the next question is what is the most suitable framework? What is the most effective way of providing safety security at design, build, and runtime? And how do you mitigate the common risks? And I mean security, I mean safety. Think of it this way: even at a 15% hallucination rate, you still have a risk of safety events, meaning wrong outputs. Now, imagine an agentic workflow that involves 3 different large language models. So you have a potential compounding effect there. And then you have things that we call them emerging behaviors, right? As flows become complex, multi-agent, multi-LLM, you might have emerging behaviors which you simply can't predict or forecast. How do you detect them, right? How do you, detect along, an agentic flow? We call it alignment, that the alignment between the user objective and what the agents are doing is broken. So very simple example. It's not realistic, but it's easy to understand. I tell my agent, find me a flight to Miami, book me the cheapest flight to Miami between tomorrow and next week, Tuesday. And as you observe the agentic flow, it asks to access GitHub.
Right.
It is obvious that these two things don't fit together. So this is what we mean with agentic alignment, that you look at the user intention and the user objective. What is the objective of the agentic engagement? And then you observe the steps and the individual action taken by agents. They obviously need to be aligned in sense of they fit together. They represent the user's objective and intention. If that alignment breaks, it is either model failure, hallucination, emerging behavior, or it is an attack, right? Is somebody basically interfering with that respective flow?
No, very well explained. And I think from explainability point of view, and even from safety security, now with the public sector and several organizations started realizing it, okay, what governance we need to put in place before moving to production environment. And that's the where now the stage has come, that where you start getting questions from different customers. How are you going to put up governance on place? How are you going to manage this? How are you going to manage X, Y, all these hallucinations on, okay, guardrails putting into that one, PI information. So 6 months back, there was less focus on that one. So keeping in this context, how your tool is making sure that, okay, it addresses all these key areas for any organization.
By providing a comprehensive set, we call them signals.
Okay.
And a signal for us is an indication that content or part of input or output are a policy violation. So let me give you an example. When we talk about safety, we talk about toxicity, illegality, we talk about disclosure of PII, PCI, PHI, or secrets, data loss protection. So it is basically the safe use of AI in that context. If we talk about security, we talk about natural language instructions given to a model or agentic workflow. Well, it's actually a model technically, even if it's an agentic workflow, that basically have a malicious intention, right? They try to convince the model to do something it shouldn't be doing, right? In the simple example we used before, the chatbot starts swearing at your customer. That might be a toxicity case, right? Because the speech is toxic towards the customer. But you might have a scenario where the agent asks the LLM for instructions, basically, hey, I have this user request. What am I supposed to do? And somebody injects, let's say, a jailbreak or another attack vector into that. So that needs to be detected. So in summary, what we do is we excel at classifying natural language and classifying code, right? Because these are the two dominant content types we currently find. It's natural language and it's code. Um, of course, there are multimodal models, and we were going to talk about audio, and we're going to talk about video, images, etc. But at the moment, the core risks and attack vectors are based on natural language. By the way, that could be embedded in an attached PDF. It could be in a website embedded, right? So the agent scrapes a website, and in that website, you basically have the embedded attack. So the manifestation of the attack vector can be, quite diverse.
So how's your experience when with the cybersecurity departments of different organizations? Are they become active with the Gen AI and Agentic AI? Are they still becoming like a showstoppers that to stop innovation? That was the reason, one of the reason that when you start working on Gen AI projects, that okay, security will stop it. So let's start working on, let's pilot it until we have something in place to bring them. So what is your experience going on that area?
It's a great question because 6-7 months ago, we were not clear who is our main stakeholder,
Right.
right? Is it the regulatory folks? Is it the legal? Is it the AI transformation officer, the machine learning? There's a lot of job titles that popped up, and it was not very clear who are we actually targeting. There seems to be a development the last 6-7 months that it all gravitated towards the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, to be the main owner of the tooling. It doesn't mean it's the only stakeholder, right? But it's the main owner, and they basically align then with other cross functions such as privacy or regulatory affairs and so on and so forth. We actually talked to a client today who basically told us, well, Department X and Department Y are ready to go into production. Now they asked us to basically join the party and help us protect the respective use cases. Not so much on the agentic side. As I mentioned earlier, we feel that the CISOs, and because maybe corporations had a bit of experience with the chatbots and the large language model use cases, they pulled in security earlier now as we go to agentic. But long story short, 90% of our stakeholders that we work with is the security organization, is the CISO.
Okay. Before we conclude our session, any lessons learned while one is developing this as a platform, and another from that angle that okay, you develop your product as a platform, right? Any lessons from that side? And while working with different customers who are trying to adopt any AI, Gen AI or Agentic AI, any piece of advice for them before we conclude for today?
I think awareness. Remember in the cybersecurity days
Yeah,
when we start talking about training and employee awareness, I think the same holds true here, right?
100% true.
Making employees aware what can go wrong if you just go out there and use any public large language model and copy paste your company's information into these models. Up to agentic AI. Remember, agentic AI is natural language based. We actually published an article called "Natural Language is the New Code." You don't need
True.
to be a coder anymore to develop an agentic use case, right? So you have the citizen developers that will arrive, that will pop up in business departments, and without the awareness and understanding of what can go wrong or how to safely do that, I think you're gonna have similar experiences like in the cybersecurity days, the earlier days, where we had to create this awareness across employees, stakeholders, third parties, right? Third-party risk management is equally a topic here. So that if you ask me to do one, it's really the education and awareness creation is equally important in this space.
Right. And do you see the skill gap from AI? One, where you said this is required, but even from a technical side, where these models and workflows need to be redeveloped, rethought. So how is our situation from a skills development point of view generally?
I think you need to separate data science from generative
True,
AI.
true.
These are not always the same
Yes,
tools,
agree.
right? So you often need data science knowledge or data science skill for specific use cases. There are other use cases where you need people that are experienced with building a RAG, for example, or understanding how, which model to invoke for specific use cases. So I think the first important piece is you don't always need a data scientist to build an agentic use case or generative use case. The other piece which is a challenge is the pace of development and the space evolving, right? I mean, this is obviously our bread and butter, and we spend significant amount of time every day just trying to understand which models are new and which, what is the latest technology on RAG or vector space and so on and so forth. So I think there is some degree of knowledge gap or skill gap. But on the other hand, a lot of companies basically started at the same level from scratch, probably selecting suitable employees to go on that learning and training path. And therefore, I feel that the field is more or less leveled, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining. If someone wants to reach out to you or your organization, what is the best medium?
Our webpage is www.eIceberg.ai. You can reach out via that or ping me on LinkedIn. So whatever your preferred means of communication.
Thank you so much, Alex, for joining. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.